The coffee tray rattled in her hands as she stepped through the door, and Lieutenant Ethan Brooks was on his feet before she'd cleared the threshold. "Excuse me," his voice cut across the room. "This is a restricted briefing. You need to leave." Maya Caldwell didn't flinch. She set the tray down on the nearest surface with the kind of steadiness that comes from landing a 44,000-pound aircraft on a moving carrier deck at night. "I'm aware of what this room is," she said. "Then you know you don't belong here." 17 officers watched. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody knew what was coming. If this story already has you leaning forward, subscribe, hit like, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go. The morning shift at Fort Ravenport Medical Center began the way it always did, with the smell of industrial floor cleaner, the distant clatter of supply carts, and the particular silence of a hospital that had already been awake for hours before most of its staff arrived. Maya Caldwell got there at 05:30. Not because she had to. Her shift didn't start until 0700, but the trauma ward had transferred 3 patients overnight, and she liked to know what she was walking into before she walked into it. She liked the quiet hour before the day became a thing you had to survive. She moved through the corridors with the tray she'd picked up from the staff kitchen, 4 coffees, 2 teas, a stack of cups she'd grabbed because the overnight nurses always forgot to eat or drink anything, and by 0600 they looked like they'd been awake since the previous administration, which, most mornings, they had. Ravenport was a military hospital attached to a joint operations base on the coast of North Carolina. It handled everything from routine medical work for the base population to high-acuity trauma cases when units came back from deployment. It had the kind of institutional weight that came from decades of purpose. Wide hallways, drop ceilings, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly unwell. The kind of building that had seen too much to be impressed by anything. Maya had been working here for 14 months. In that time, she had placed herself deliberately, carefully, into the background. She was 36 years old. She kept her dark hair pulled back. She wore her scrubs the way she wore everything, clean, functional, without comment. She answered to Nurse Caldwell, or just Maya, depending on who was talking, and she did not correct people who assumed she was new, or junior, or simply passing through on her way to something more important. She did not explain herself. She did not advertise. The people she worked with knew she was good at her job. The overnight charge nurse, a compact woman named Felicity Oram, who had been in trauma nursing for 22 years, had told her once, quietly, that she was the best pair of hands she'd seen in a decade. Maya had thanked her and changed the subject. That was enough. That was in fact exactly what she'd wanted. What the people at Ravenport did not know, what she had worked to keep them from knowing, was everything else. She turned the corner toward the trauma wing and nearly walked into Captain Gerald Sutter, who was coming the other direction with a tablet in one hand and an expression of chronic mild irritation that seemed to be his permanent factory setting. Sutter was the hospital's Deputy Director of Clinical Operations, a position that gave him authority over the nursing staff, and a title long enough to compensate for the fact that he had never once, in Maya's observation, asked a nurse what they needed before telling them what to do. "Caldwell." He stopped, looked at the tray. "Why are you here this early?" "Checking in on the overnight transfers." "That's the charge nurse's job. Felicity's got 4 post-ops and a pending discharge. I'm covering her walkthrough." Sutter made a sound that wasn't quite acknowledgement and wasn't quite dismissal. "The command briefing's been moved to the East Conference Suite. I need someone to handle hospitality setup before 0730. Maya looked at him. "Coffee, water, whatever they need," he said. "The Admiral's people called ahead, full setup." "I'm trauma staff," she said, "not support services." "I'm aware of what you are, Caldwell." He said it with the particular tone of a man who had never once considered that a statement might carry more meaning than he intended. "I need bodies, and you're early. Take the tray. I'll note it as your shift start." He walked away without waiting for a response. Maya stood in the corridor for a moment. She looked at the tray in her hands. Then she turned and walked toward the East Conference Suite. The East Wing of Ravenport was technically part of the hospital complex, but it functioned more like an administrative building. Offices, conference rooms, secure communication suites. The corridors were carpeted instead of tiled. The lighting was slightly warmer. It was the part of the building where rank became visible in the way people moved and the amount of space they took up. The conference suite was already busy when she arrived. A staff sergeant she didn't recognize was arranging chairs. Two officers in army dress greens were talking near the window, their backs to her. There was a whiteboard at the front of the room with a topographic map pinned to it, aerial photographs she deliberately didn't look at too closely, and a classified document folder sitting on the table with a red border that meant she wasn't supposed to read it, which she hadn't. She set the tray on the side table near the door, found the water jugs and the extra cups where the supply closet key she'd grabbed from the staff kitchen gave her access. She moved efficiently, without drawing attention, which was easy because nobody in the room looked at her directly. She was the woman with the tray. She was furniture. She had, in another life, flown FA-18s off the deck of the USS Kestrel in the South China Sea. She refilled the water pitchers and did not think about that. The room filled gradually. By 07:15, there were 18 people in it, a mix of Army, Navy, and Marine Corps officers, most of them 04 and above, with two colonels near the front and a cluster of junior officers near the back who had the look of people attending their first high-stakes briefing and trying not to show it. There was a general energy of controlled readiness. Something real was being planned in this room, or evaluated, or decided. That much was obvious from the quality of attention. Maya finished the setup and was moving toward the door when she heard a voice she didn't recognize addressing her. "Hold on." She turned. Lieutenant Ethan Brooks was 28 years old, if she had to guess. He had the build of someone who'd played collegiate sports and hadn't quite let go of that identity, and the posture of an officer who had recently received a promotion that confirmed what he'd already believed about himself. He wore army dress uniform, his rank insignia crisp, his expression carrying the particular blend of authority and impatience that Maya had seen in 100 forms over 20 years of service. She had also, in that time, seen what happened to officers like that when they ran into something they hadn't anticipated. "This is a restricted command briefing," Brooks said. He wasn't loud. He was making a point of not being loud, which was its own kind of performance. Hospital staff aren't permitted in secured conference spaces during active briefings. "I was asked to handle setup by Captain Sutter," Maya said. "Setup's done. You can go." She held his gaze for a beat. "I understand." She moved toward the door and he stepped slightly, not fully, not completely, but enough, into her path. Not blocking her, just making the geometry of the moment clear. "Before you go," he said, "I'm going to need your name and department for the access log. Unauthorized personnel in a secured space is a reportable. Caldwell, Maya Caldwell, trauma nursing, 3rd floor." She said it without inflection. "My access badge cleared the door the same as everyone else's. Captain Sutter authorized my presence for setup purposes, which is complete." Brooks looked at her badge. Then he looked at her scrubs. Then his eyes moved, briefly, dismissively, to the small patch on her left shoulder, a detail of her previous service she had not removed because removing it would have required acknowledging why she was removing it. It was a small thing. Most people didn't notice it. Most people didn't know what it meant. "That's Navy aviator insignia," Brooks said. He said it the way you say something when you're trying to be polite about the fact that you think someone is lying. "Strike pilot designation." "Yes." "You're a nurse." "Yes." He let a silence sit between them that was designed to communicate something. She waited it out. She was very good at waiting. "You don't have clearance to be in this room," he said finally, "regardless of what Captain Sutter told you." "My clearance is current," Maya said. "It was reviewed at intake 14 months ago." Trauma nursing staff doesn't carry sufficient clearance for a command-level joint operations briefing. "That's a reasonable assumption," she said, "but it's not accurate in my case." Brooks smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had decided this interaction was taking longer than it deserved. "Ma'am, I don't know how you got that patch on your uniform, and I'm not going to make assumptions, but this briefing is above your pay grade, way above it." He said the last part quietly, like he was doing her a favor. "I suggest you head back to your floor." The room had gone quiet. Not dramatically. It wasn't a scene, not yet. But the quality of the attention in the space had shifted. Conversations had paused. People were watching in the peripheral way of professionals, who are too senior to rubberneck, but not senior enough to intervene. Maya looked at Brooks for a moment. She thought about the 14 months she'd spent building exactly this ordinary, unremarkable, quietly competent life. She thought about why she'd built it. "I'll wait outside," she said. She turned and walked to the door, and she almost made it. "The insignia," Brooks said behind her, louder now, addressing the room as much as her. "It's not just a clearance issue. Wearing designation patches you didn't earn is a violation of military." Maya stopped. She turned around. The room was fully quiet now. She walked back to where Brooks was standing, and she did not do it quickly or dramatically. She covered the distance the way she covered most distances, with economy, with precision, with the particular quality of movement that comes from spending years in environments where any wasted motion was a liability. She stopped 2 feet from him and looked him in the eyes. "I earned it," she said. She said it without heat, without drama, the same way she might report a patient's vitals or confirm a medication dosage. It was not a statement designed to impress anyone. It was simply accurate. Something in Brooks's face shifted, just slightly, the first fracture in the performance, but he caught it fast. "That's a serious claim," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." She held his eyes for another second, and then she turned and walked to the door, and this time nobody said anything, and this time she made it out. The corridor outside the conference suite was empty. Maya stood against the wall, arms crossed, and listened to the sound of the briefing resuming behind the closed door. The shuffle of chairs, the low voices, the click of something being projected on the display screen. She pulled out her phone and looked at it. Nothing yet. She'd known this was coming, not this specifically. Not this room, not this lieutenant with his clean insignia and his clean certainty about the way the world was organized, but something like it. Something that would make the quiet life she'd built here harder to maintain. She just hoped for more time. She put the phone away and looked at the end of the corridor where a window looked out onto the base, the parade ground, the motor pool, the flight line in the distance where a pair of helicopters sat in the early morning light. She had not flown in 3 years. This was a choice she'd made deliberately and had not, until very recently, regretted. The door behind her opened. One of the Marine officers she'd noticed earlier, a lieutenant colonel, trim, mid-50s, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned to conserve effort, stepped out. He looked at her. His eyes went to her shoulder patch and stayed there for a moment longer than a casual glance. "Caldwell," he said. Not a question. "Yes, sir." "Maya Caldwell." She looked at him carefully. She did not recognize his face. That didn't mean much. She'd crossed paths with hundreds of officers over the years, and the Marine Corps was a smaller world than it appeared from outside. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't think we've met." "We haven't." He extended his hand. "Colonel Warren Taft. I served with a few people who knew you, or knew of you." She shook his hand. "I prefer the nurse part these days." Taft studied her for a moment. He had the look of a man doing arithmetic. "The young lieutenant in there," he said carefully. "He doesn't know." "No." "You didn't correct him." "It wasn't the time." Taft was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There's going to be a problem." She waited. "The Admiral's arriving at 0800, he said. "Admiral Nathaniel Cross. He's why the briefing got moved up. He requested this facility specifically." Taft paused. "I don't know if you're aware of his—" "I'm aware," Maya said. Taft looked at her steadily. "Then you know he's going to walk through that door, and whatever life you've been living here is going to get complicated." Maya looked down the corridor. The helicopters on the flight line caught the light differently as the sun shifted. One moment dark, the next briefly brilliant. "I know," she said. "There may be a way to—" "There's not," she said. She said it simply. "There's not a way to manage this one. I've known that for a while." Taft seemed to want to say something else. He thought better of it. He was, she suspected, a man who had learned that some truths operated on their own schedule and could not be usefully hurried. "For what it's worth," he said, "that lieutenant is wrong about the patch. He'll figure that out." She pushed off the wall and stood straight. "Excuse me, Colonel. I should check in with my floor." She walked down the corridor and did not look back. Behind her, she could hear the distant sound of the briefing continuing, the low, authoritative voices of men planning something significant, the world she had left carrying on without her. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. "ETA 20 metrium. We need to talk before I come in. NC." She stopped in the middle of the corridor. Read it again. Put the phone in her pocket. 20 minutes. She had spent 14 months building something quiet, something sustainable, something that asked nothing of her old self. She had moved to Ravenport because it was remote enough to be anonymous, large enough to need her skills, and far enough from everything she'd been that she could breathe without the weight of it. 20 minutes. She took the stairs instead of the elevator, an old habit, another life. And by the time she reached the trauma ward, the world was still moving at its ordinary pace. Patients were waking, monitors were beeping. Felicity Oram was transferring patient notes with the focused efficiency of someone doing 6 things at once. "You're early," Felicity said without looking up. "Sutter had me do setup in the East Wing." Felicity made a noise that communicated exactly what she thought of Captain Gerald Sutter, without requiring any specific words to do it. "Your 0730 admission is already up here. 19-year-old private fell from a vehicle during a training exercise. Possible spinal involvement. Imaging's in the system." "I'll take it." "You sure? I'm sure." She went to the patient. The private's name was Kerwin Dale, and he was 19 years old, and he was scared in the way that young soldiers are scared when their body has done something unexpected and they don't yet know the full cost. He had a field compression dressing on his left arm, bruising across his ribs, and the particular pallor of someone who'd lost some blood and was trying to act like he hadn't. "Hey," Maya said, sitting on the edge of the chair beside his bed. "I'm Maya. I'm your nurse this morning." "Hi." His voice was rough. Is it bad?" "Imaging shows no spinal damage. You've got 2 cracked ribs and a significant laceration on your arm that we're going to take care of shortly. You're going to be sore for a few weeks, but you're going to be fine." He let out a breath. "Okay. Is there someone you want us to contact? Family?" "My mom." He swallowed. "She's going to lose it." "Moms usually do," Maya said. "Then they're relieved and they bring food, and they remind you to be careful for the next 20 years. Kerwin almost smiled. "Yeah, sounds like her." Maya checked his vitals, noted his current pain level, reviewed the imaging one more time with the particular attention of someone reading the same map she'd read 1,000 times and still looking for anything she'd missed. Nothing new, stable, treatable. She was annotating the chart when her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen. Here. 2 letters. She'd been waiting for them for 3 years, and she still wasn't ready. She set the phone down on the chart stand. She finished the annotation, confirmed the laceration protocol with the duty surgeon, updated Felicity on the patient's status, and did every single one of these things with the same steady precision she brought to everything, because the only way she knew how to manage the approach of something large and unavoidable was to keep doing the work directly in front of her. Then she walked back toward the East Wing. The corridor outside the conference suite had more people in it now. An aide she hadn't seen before, a pair of MPs flanking the main entrance, and the particular quality of stillness that precedes the arrival of significant rank. Everyone a little straighter, a little more deliberate, the kind of unconscious adjustment that happens when power is about to enter a room. She heard his voice before she saw him. "Where's the nursing supervisor?" "Sir, She's on the floor. I don't need the supervisor." The voice was measured, controlled. The voice of a man who had given orders in noise and chaos and had learned long ago that volume was the least efficient way to be heard. "I need Caldwell, Maya Caldwell. Is she on this floor?" Silence. Then, "Sir, there's a nurse Caldwell on the trauma ward, but she's not. Send someone to get her." Maya stepped around the corner. Admiral Nathaniel Cross was 61 years old, and he had the build of a man who had been large once and had redistributed the weight into something denser, more settled. His uniform was correct in every particular. His face was the face of someone who had spent his life making decisions that other people had to live with, and it showed, not as hardness exactly, but as a kind of permanent attention, as if he were always assessing something just past the edge of what was visible. He saw her, and he stopped. For a moment, just a moment, something moved in his face that wasn't rank or authority or strategic calculation, something older than any of that. "Valkyrie," he said. The word fell into the corridor the way a stone falls into still water. Around them, the aides and the MPs and the staff sergeant with the clipboard all went very quiet. Inside the conference room, through the closed door, Maya could hear the briefing continuing, Lieutenant Brooks's voice, clear and organized, presenting something to the assembled officers. She looked at Admiral Cross. "Sir," she said, "it's been a long time." "Yes, sir." He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at the conference room door, then back at her. "I heard there was an incident this morning," he said, "with one of my officers." "It was minor," Maya said. "I'll be the judge of that." He said it without heat, but he said it firmly. "Walk me through what happened." "Sir, I really don't think—" "Walk me through it, Caldwell." She did. Briefly, without editorializing, the way she would report a patient's status. Here are the facts. Here is the sequence. Here is the current state. She did not embellish. She did not diminish. She reported. Cross listened with the stillness of a man who was making calculations that would not be visible until he chose to act on them. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Did he touch you?" "No, sir." "Did he attempt to remove you physically?" "No." "But he questioned your insignia?" "Yes." Cross nodded once. It was the kind of nod that meant something had been decided, filed, and would be acted upon at a time and manner of his choosing. "All right," he said. "Come inside with me." "Sir, that's an order, Caldwell." He said it without volume or drama. Not a request. She looked at the door. 14 months. She'd had 14 months. "Yes, sir," she said. He pushed the door open and walked in, and Maya walked in behind him, and the briefing stopped the way a clock stops when the power goes out. All at once, completely, with that particular silence that isn't really silence so much as the absence of something that was there a moment ago. Lieutenant Brooks was standing at the front of the room, a pointer in his hand, a map behind him. He saw the Admiral and came to attention. Everyone in the room came to attention. It happened with the smooth precision of people trained to respond to exactly this. Cross walked to the front of the room. He did not look at Brooks. He looked at the assembled officers. And then he turned and looked at Maya, standing near the door, still in her scrubs, still with her coffee-stained sleeve from the morning spill in the kitchen, still completely, visibly, unmistakably herself. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cross said, and his voice was quiet and it carried to every corner of the room. "Before we continue, I want to introduce someone. Most of you haven't met her. Some of you have heard the name." Brooks lowered the pointer slowly. "This is Maya Caldwell," Cross said. "You may know her as the trauma nurse on the 3rd floor. Prior to that," he paused for a fraction of a second. "Prior to that, she was Lieutenant Commander Maya Caldwell. Call sign, Valkyrie. Strike pilot, Navy Carrier Aviation, USS Kestrel, and USS Iron Gate. 412 carrier landings, 2 combat deployments, and the mission commander for Operation Winter Passage, which most of you have been briefed on in some form. The extraction that pulled 11 Special Operations soldiers out of a compromised site in the Danvar Valley under active fire." The room was completely still. She was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for that extraction. She was also awarded the Navy Cross. Cross turned and looked directly at Lieutenant Brooks, who had gone a particular shade of pale. For the second mission, the one the official record lists only as classified. Brooks was holding the pointer at his side and his knuckles were white. "She left active duty 3 years ago," Cross continued. "She chose to work here. She chose to work as a nurse. That is her right, and it reflects, in my opinion, exactly the kind of person she has always been." He looked at the room. "I expect that information to inform how she is treated in this facility from this moment forward." He looked at Maya. She looked back at him. Across the room, Lieutenant Brooks set the pointer down on the table with a soft, precise click, and the sound of it was somehow the loudest thing in the room. Brooks set the pointer down on the table with a soft, precise click, and the sound of it was somehow the loudest thing in the room. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for a pen or a phone or a water glass. 18 officers in a secured conference suite at Fort Ravenport Medical Center held themselves in a collective stillness that had nothing to do with military discipline and everything to do with the particular human paralysis that follows the discovery that you have badly, fundamentally misread a situation. Lieutenant Ethan Brooks was standing at the front of the room and he was looking at Maya Caldwell, and his face was doing something complicated that he was not fully managing to conceal. Maya looked back at him and felt nothing aggressive. That surprised her slightly. She'd spent enough time anticipating this moment, or something like it, that she'd half expected to feel vindicated or angry, or at minimum the cold satisfaction of having been right when someone else was wrong. What she actually felt was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Admiral Cross let the silence sit for exactly as long as it needed to. Then he said, "Carry on," and moved to the chair at the head of the table that had clearly been left for him. And just like that, the briefing was supposed to resume. It didn't resume. Not immediately. Brooks was still standing at the front of the room, and the map was still behind him, and the pointer was on the table, and none of the machinery of the morning had quite figured out how to restart itself. "Lieutenant?" Cross said. Not loud, just present. Brooks blinked. "Yes, sir." "Of course." He picked up the pointer. He turned toward the map. He began speaking again, and his voice was level and organized and technically correct, and Maya could hear, underneath all of that, the sound of a man performing competence at a moment when competence was the only thing he had left to hold on to. She stayed near the door. Cross had not told her to sit, and she had not presumed. She stood with her back close to the wall and watched the briefing continue, and tried to look like someone who belonged here in a way that didn't require explanation, which she did, which had always been true, and which had apparently needed an admiral to establish. Colonel Taft caught her eye from across the room. His expression was unreadable, but he gave her a small nod, the nod of a man who had done the arithmetic earlier and was now watching the answer arrive. She looked away. The briefing was a logistics review for a joint training exercise scheduled for the following month. Nothing classified at the level that would have actually kept her out of the room, regardless of her current rank. Sutter's assessment of her clearance had been wrong, as she'd said, but she hadn't wanted to push that particular point in the corridor because pushing points wasn't something she did. She listened to the operational details with half her attention and kept the other half on the room. Brooks finished his portion 20 minutes later and sat down. He did not look at her when he sat. He looked at the table. Cross took over the remainder of the meeting with the efficiency of someone who had run enough of these to know where they slowed down and what could be cut. He was good at it. Not performatively good. Not the kind of good that needed an audience to function, just actually, practically good in the way of someone who had never needed to prove competence because it had never seriously been in question. At 09:10, he closed the briefing and people began gathering their materials and standing, and the room filled with the low noise of a meeting ending. Maya moved to leave. "Caldwell." She stopped. 5 minutes, Cross said. He was already talking to Colonel Taft about something else, but he said it in her direction, and the word was a period, not a question. She waited near the door while the room emptied. Brooks left with 2 other officers, and as he passed her, the distance between them was approximately 4 feet, and she could see him deciding not to say anything, and she was grateful for the decision because she didn't know what she would have done with words from him right now. Then the room was empty except for Cross and Taft and Maya. Cross sat down at the table. He didn't gesture for her to sit, so she stayed standing, which he noticed and which he corrected with a look at the nearest chair. She sat. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 14 months. 14. He repeated it like he was counting something. "You didn't tell anyone?" "No." "Not your supervisor, not the base commander?" "No one," she said. "I came through standard intake. My service record transferred with appropriate clearance notation. Nobody looked closely enough to—" "Nobody expected to," Cross said, "which is exactly what you counted on." She didn't answer that because it was accurate. Taft was leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed, listening and not participating, which Maya understood as his way of being present without crowding the conversation. "Why Ravenport?" Cross asked. "I needed to work somewhere that needed trauma nurses. Ravenport has a high patient volume, a mixed civilian-military population, and it's not the kind of posting that gets visited often by people who might know my face." "Until today." "Until today," she agreed. Cross looked at her steadily. He had a way of looking at people that was neither hard nor soft. It was precise, the way a tool is precise, designed specifically for the function of seeing clearly. "The Sutter situation," he said. "The tasking to set up. It's fine." "It isn't fine. It's not worth Caldwell." He said her name the way he'd always said it. Not as a correction, not as a reprimand, but as a signal that the next thing he was going to say mattered, and he needed her to hear it without defensive interference. A deputy director of clinical operations assigned a decorated combat officer to carry a coffee tray because he assumed she was available to fill a support role. And she did it, because she's been letting this place treat her as invisible for 14 months. "That was the arrangement I wanted," she said. "I understand that." "Then, I understand it, and I'm telling you it's over." He said it simply, without triumph or apology. Not because I'm taking something from you, because Lieutenant Brooks's conduct this morning is going to be reviewed. And when it's reviewed, your record is going to come out. And once your record is out, your cover is gone regardless of what I do. She had known this. She'd known it since the moment Brooks had opened his mouth in the conference room, and she had calculated the blast radius in approximately 4 seconds. She had known it, and she had gone and checked on Private Kerwin Dale anyway, because there was nothing else useful to do with knowing it. What's the review process? She asked. I'm initiating it today. Brooks's conduct constitutes disrespect toward a superior officer. Technically, by rank classification, you outgrade him even in your current reserve status. The insignia comment specifically is going to require a formal response. He didn't know. That's not a defense, Cross said. If anything, it's an indictment. He didn't know because he didn't ask. He assumed, and he acted on the assumption aggressively, in front of a room full of officers. He paused. That's the kind of judgment call that tells you something real about a person. Maya looked at the table. There was a ring on the surface from someone's coffee cup. Faint, the kind of thing you'd only notice if you were looking at it directly. He's young, she said. You were younger when you were doing things that are still classified, Cross said. Young doesn't explain it. I know. I'm not looking for you to defend him. I'm not defending him, she said. I know what it costs me to learn what he still needs to learn. I don't want to spend what he owes on something that doesn't build anything. Cross was quiet for a moment. Taft shifted his weight against the wall. That, Cross said finally, is exactly why this is more complicated than a standard conduct review. The morning moved on the way. Mornings at military hospitals move, not gracefully, not smoothly, but with the relentless forward momentum of a system that cannot afford to stop for human drama. Patients needed things. Medications needed to be administered and charted. The private with the cracked ribs needed his laceration closed and his vitals checked, and someone to tell his mother, who had arrived at 1,000 in a state of controlled panic, that he was going to be genuinely fine, and not just fine in the way that medical staff sometimes say fine when they mean fine enough. Maya did all of it. She moved through her shift with the same efficiency she always brought, the same attention, the same hands. But the ward felt different in a way she couldn't fully attribute to anything specific. People looked at her differently. Not all of them, and not dramatically, but enough. Word traveled in a hospital the way it traveled everywhere. Imperfectly, selectively, transformed by each person who passed it along. By noon, Felicity Oram had heard something. Maya could tell by the way Felicity handed her a patient chart with a slightly different quality of directness, as if she was trying to communicate respect through the act of handing over a document. I heard there was something in the East Wing this morning, Felicity said. There was a briefing. And you were in it. I was in the corridor near it. Felicity looked at her. Felicity had been in trauma nursing for 22 years, and she had a finely calibrated instrument for identifying when someone was technically telling the truth while declining to explain it. Okay, she said. You know I'm not going to push. I know. I just want to say, Felicity stopped, started again. You've been a good nurse here. Really good. Whatever else, I want you to know that part isn't complicated for me. Maya looked at her. There was something in Felicity's voice that wasn't sentimental exactly, but was close to it. The voice of someone who suspected that a colleague's life was about to change in ways that would take her somewhere else, and wanted to register the loss while there was still time. Nothing's changed on this floor, Maya said. Today or tomorrow. Felicity nodded and took back the chart, and the conversation was over, which was its own kind of kindness. At 12:30, Captain Sutter found her in the medication room. He came in without knocking, which was not unusual for him, and he stood in the doorway with his tablet in his hand, and his expression had changed from its standard mild irritation to something with more specific texture, part defensive, part calculating, the face of a man trying to figure out how much he should already have known and whether not knowing it made him look bad. Caldwell, he said, I need to talk to you about this morning. I'm charting, she said. I know you're charting. I need 2 minutes. She finished the line she was writing, then she looked up. I didn't know, Sutter said. About your record. Your whatever it is. I want that to be clear. Okay. When I asked you to do the setup, I was filling a gap, she said. I know. I need you to understand I didn't intend any... Captain, she kept her voice even. I'm not looking to escalate this. I did the setup. The briefing ran. It's done. Sutter was quiet for a moment. He was working through something. She could see him working through it. The recalculation of who she was and what that meant and how it changed the mathematics of their professional relationship. She had seen this calculation before on other faces, and it was always slightly uncomfortable to watch because it was so naked. The Admiral's office called, he said finally. There's going to be a formal review of the incident with Lieutenant Brooks. They want a statement from me about the tasking authorization. That seems appropriate. Yes, but... He stopped. Will it come back on me? The way I assigned you this morning? She looked at him. She thought about what it would cost to tell him the charitable truth, which was that the review was about Brooks and not about him, versus the more complicated truth, which was that a review of Brooks's conduct would inevitably touch on the environment that had made it possible, and that environment included supervisors who assigned decorated combat veterans to carry coffee without asking why they were there. Tell them what happened accurately, she said. That's all you can do. Sutter left without saying anything else, and the medication room was quiet again. Lieutenant Ethan Brooks requested a meeting with Admiral Cross at 1400. Maya heard about this not from Cross or from Brooks, but from the aide who had been outside the conference suite that morning, a young specialist named Dara Watts, who had clearly been processing the events of the day in real time, and who told Maya about the meeting request with the particular energy of someone who had witnessed something significant and wasn't entirely sure yet what it signified. Maya thanked her and did not ask for details, which Watts found slightly disappointing, but respected. She thought about Brooks requesting that meeting for the rest of her afternoon shift. She thought about what it took to walk toward a thing you'd gotten wrong when the easier path was to wait and see if anyone remembered. She didn't know if that's what he was doing. She didn't know if he was going to cross to explain himself, or defend himself, or apologize, or something else entirely that she hadn't considered. She found herself somewhere in the middle of a dressing change on a 43-year-old sergeant with a surgical wound that was healing slower than it should, hoping it was the apology option. She didn't examine that hope too carefully. It felt premature and possibly unearned, and she had learned a long time ago not to invest in outcomes she couldn't influence. At 15:45, she was in the supply room logging inventory when the door opened and someone stood in it, and she turned and it was Brooks. He was in his army dress uniform still. He hadn't changed, and he looked like someone who had spent the last several hours in a particular kind of internal weather. Not disheveled. He was too trained for disheveled, but worn at the edges in a way that the morning's crisp certainty had not predicted. Nurse Caldwell, he said. Do you have a moment? She looked at him. She looked at the inventory clipboard in her hands. What do you need, Lieutenant? He came into the room, stood with about 6 feet between them. He was not comfortable, and he was not pretending to be, which was something. I spoke with Admiral Cross, he said. I heard. I want... He stopped, started again. The rehearsed opening wasn't working, and she could see him abandoning it. What I said this morning about the insignia. You were wrong, she said. Simply, factually, the way she'd told him he was wrong the first time. Yes. He said it with more weight than the syllable usually carries. I was wrong, and I need you to know that I understand why that matters beyond the rank issue or the clearance issue. I said you hadn't earned it. Yes. And you had. He looked at her directly. His jaw was tight. I don't know the specifics of your record because the Admiral's aide told me most of it is still classified. But I know enough to know that what I said was careless, she said. You were careless. He looked slightly startled. He'd been preparing for something harder, and she'd given him something accurate instead. Yes, he said. Careless. I made an assumption and I was careless with someone else's, with your... He ran out of the right word. History, she said. Yes. She studied him for a moment. He was 28, and he had done something genuinely wrong, and he had gone to the Admiral about it, and he was standing in a supply room with a woman whose past he'd insulted that morning, and he was holding himself accountable for it without being asked to, which was not nothing. It was not enough. But it was not nothing. I appreciate you coming, she said. I don't want you to think, Brooks. She kept her voice level. I don't need this conversation to go anywhere in particular. You said something wrong. I corrected it. The Admiral confirmed it. What matters now is what you do with that. He looked at her like he'd been expecting her to do something else with the moment, to accept the apology formally or reject it or turn it into something about her. He hadn't expected her to redirect it toward him. "The review board," he said. "Whatever the outcome is, that's between you and your command," she said. "I haven't been asked to provide a statement yet, and I won't be volunteering one." "I know. The Admiral told me." Something moved in his face. "Why not?" She thought about the honest answer, which was complicated and personal, and then she thought about the useful answer, which was simpler. "Because making an example of you doesn't fix what's broken," she said. "And something's broken here. Not just you." She turned back to the inventory clipboard. Behind her, she heard him stand in the doorway for another moment. Then he said quietly, "I'm sorry. For this morning." She didn't turn around. "I know," she said. She heard him leave. She stood in the supply room for a moment with the clipboard in her hands and the inventory half-logged and the late afternoon light coming through the small high window above the shelving. She thought about Operation Winter Passage. She thought about 11 men in the Danvar Valley and the decisions she'd made in a space of approximately 40 seconds that the official record had partially documented and the classified addendum had fully described, and that she had not spoken aloud to another person in 3 years. She put the clipboard down. She needed air. She took the back stairs to the exterior access and pushed through the door into the late afternoon heat and stood on the loading dock with her hands on the railing and the base spread out in front of her. The parade ground, the motor pool, the flight line where the helicopters sat and where, beyond them, she could just see the shape of a fixed-wing aircraft being towed toward a hangar. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was a number she didn't recognize. Area code 7003, Northern Virginia. She answered. Caldwell. A woman's voice, crisp, senior, the voice of someone who had been operating at altitude for long enough that altitude was her resting state. "This is Rear Admiral Petra Souza, Naval Personnel Command. We haven't met." "No, ma'am," Maya said. The railing under her hands was warm from the sun. "I'm calling because your name came across my desk this afternoon in relation to an incident at Fort Ravenport." "I'm aware of the incident, ma'am." "I'm sure you are." A pause. Brief, considered. "I'm also calling because we've been sitting on a request that concerns you for approximately 8 months. We've been waiting for the right moment to surface it, and it appears, based on today's events, that the moment may have arrived whether we wanted it to or not." Maya was quiet. "There's a position," Souza said, "a formal one. It would require you to step back from the nursing role and into something that your full record, both the declassified and classified portions, has been pointing toward for some time." "What kind of position?" "I'll send the briefing document tonight. I want you to read it before we speak formally." Another pause. I also want to say, for what it's worth, what Cross told me about how you've been operating here, the way you've been working, that's not something this office takes lightly. We see it. We've been seeing it." "Ma'am," Maya said carefully, "I left active duty because I needed—" "I know why you left," Souza said. "The record is thorough. That's not why I'm calling." Her voice shifted, still precise, but with something underneath it that wasn't rank or directive, something closer to direct. "I'm calling because you're too valuable to stay invisible, Caldwell. Not to us. I understand that might sound like institutional interest, which it partly is. I'm talking about the people in rooms like that ward who need someone at the table who knows what they know and has been where they've been." Maya looked at the flight line. The aircraft had reached the hangar. A crew member was securing the tow connection, and another was checking the wing surface, running a hand along the leading edge the way you check something you're responsible for, the way you check something that matters. "Send the briefing," Maya said. "You'll have it within the hour." The line went quiet. Maya held the phone for a moment. The sun was lower now, the light going amber across the base, the long shadows of late afternoon cutting across the parade ground at angles that made the familiar geography look briefly unfamiliar. Her phone buzzed again. A text this time. Not Souza. Not Cross. It was from Felicity Oram on the trauma ward. "Need you back up here. Now. Got a situation with the 1900 admission, and it's bad." Maya was already moving before she finished reading it. She went up the back stairs at a pace she rarely used in a building where running meant something had gone catastrophically wrong, and when she pushed through the ward doors, Felicity was standing at the nursing station, with the controlled emergency expression that Maya had learned to read the way other people read faces. "What is it?" "Incoming from the base perimeter," Felicity said, already moving. "Training accident, vehicle rollover, 2 personnel. One of them is on a ventilator in the field. The medics are calling ahead." She handed Maya the preliminary sheet. "But that's not the problem." Maya looked at the sheet. Then she looked up. "What's the problem?" "The second one," Felicity said. "The second casualty from the rollover." She met Maya's eyes. "It's Brooks. Lieutenant Ethan Brooks. They're 6 minutes out." 6 minutes. Maya took the preliminary sheet from Felicity and read it in the time it took to walk from the nursing station to the trauma bay. Field report, 2 casualties. Vehicle rollover on the North Perimeter Access Road. 1 male, early 30s. Blunt force trauma to the head and chest. GCS of 7 in the field and dropping, currently intubated by the paramedic unit. The second, male, late 20s, conscious but with suspected internal injuries, BP falling. The field medic's notation reading abdominal rigidity, significant in the clipped shorthand of someone managing 2 patients at once and choosing words carefully. Brooks. Late 20s. Abdominal rigidity. She handed the sheet back to Felicity without comment. "Bay 1 and 2, she said. "I want 2 IVs prepped for each, O-neg on standby, and get me Dr. Vasquez if he's still in the building. Where's the surgical resident?" "Okonkwo. She's scrubbing from a lap procedure, should be available in 8 minutes. "Tell her I need her in 7. Maya was already pulling gloves from the dispenser at the bay entrance. "Who's the first casualty?" "Sergeant Dylan Marsh, motor pool, 31 years old. He was driving." "Okay." She snapped the glove over her left wrist and looked at the bay. The table, the monitor, the crash cart in the corner, the overhead light that someone had angled wrong and she corrected with one hand without breaking stride. "Get me the portable ultrasound and call up to imaging. I want them standing by for a chest and abdominal CT the second we can move someone." Felicity was already on the phone. The ward had shifted into the particular operational mode that trauma units enter when something real is inbound. Not chaos, not the frantic television version of emergency medicine, but a kind of focused acceleration, every person doing a specific thing with the knowledge that the timing of each specific thing mattered. Maya moved through it the way she moved through everything, not hurrying in a way that wasted motion, not slowing in a way that cost time. She had worked trauma for 14 months at Ravenport, and before that she had done things that were not officially trauma nursing, but which had required many of the same calculations: the rapid assessment, the priority triage, the decision made in 4 seconds that you then had to live with for the next 4 hours or 4 years. She was checking the IV setup in Bay 2 when she stopped. She stood with the IV tubing in her hands, and she let herself think for exactly 3 seconds about what she was about to do. Walk a man she had spent 6 hours trying to have complicated feelings about through what sounded like a genuine internal bleed, and then she put the complicated feelings in the same place she put everything else that could not be useful right now, which was a compartment she'd built carefully over many years, and she finished setting up the IV. The ambulance bay doors opened at 19:09. The first gurney came through fast. Sergeant Marsh, strapped and tubed, the paramedic walking alongside, calling out a running report that Maya tracked without taking her eyes off the patient. GCS now 6, pupils unequal, left side slower, BP 88/54 and trending, active airway management in place. Felicity took the handoff and Maya pointed her toward Bay 1, where Dr. Vasquez was already gloved and ready, and then the second gurney came through and it was Brooks. He was conscious. That was the first thing. He was awake, and he knew where he was, which meant his brain was intact at least functionally, which meant the problem was south of the neck. He was pale in the way of internal bleeding, the particular gray-white of someone whose body was quietly redirecting blood away from the surface toward the core, and his jaw was set in the tight, controlled way of someone managing significant pain while trying not to show it. He saw her. She saw him see her. She came to the side of the gurney and put 2 fingers on his wrist for a pulse, rate, quality, both, while the paramedic handed her the field report and she read it and listened to the verbal at the same time. Mechanism was vehicle rollover, driver lost control on the access road curve, passenger side impact against a concrete barrier. Patient was restrained but the door structure collapsed. Abdominal wall contusion visible on the left side, Rigidity on palpation. BP was 104/62 in the field and dropped to 91/58 in transport, heart rate 118 in climbing. He's been oriented throughout but reported increasing pain on left upper quadrant in the last 4 minutes. Left upper quadrant. Increasing. She was already thinking spleen. "Brooks," she said. He looked at her. "I need you to rate the pain, 1 to 10. 7, he said. His voice was tight. "Was it a 5 20 minutes ago?" "A beat." "Yes." "Trending up." She looked at the paramedic. "Good job. Bay 2. Let's go." She moved with the gurney into the bay, and the doors swung behind her, and Felicity appeared at her left, with the portable ultrasound unit already powered, and Maya said, "Abdomen, left upper quadrant, I need a fast exam." And Felicity handed her the probe without a word. The focused assessment with sonography for trauma, fast, was not complicated. It was fast precisely because it had to be. She pressed the probe to Brooks's abdomen, below the left costal margin, and looked at the screen, and the screen told her what she'd suspected. Free fluid. The dark accumulation of blood where blood was not supposed to be, pooling in the space around the spleen, the classic image of a solid organ injury that was bleeding and had not yet stopped and would not stop on its own. "Get me Okonkwo," she said. "Now." She kept the probe in place and looked at Brooks. He was watching her face with the focused attention of someone trying to read a situation they don't have training to fully interpret. "What is it?" he asked. "Your spleen is bleeding," she said. "We're going to manage it." "Is that—" He stopped. Recalibrated. "How serious?" "Serious enough that I need a surgeon in here in the next 4 minutes," she said. "Serious enough that I need you to stop talking and let me work." Something in his expression, the part that was still an officer, still performing, still calculating how this looked, went quiet. He nodded once and put his head back against the pillow, and she was grateful for it. She called out the orders in sequence. 2 large-bore IVs, lactated ringers wide open, type and cross-match for 4 units of packed red cells. Activate the massive transfusion protocol as a precaution, NPO status, get radiology on standby. Felicity handled 2 things at once, and the ward tech Brennan handled 2 more, and nobody asked her if she was sure about anything because she was Maya Caldwell, and she was never not sure when she was in this room, which everyone on this ward had figured out independently over the course of the last 14 months. The resident, Dr. Okonkwo, arrived at 1916. She was 29, sharp, and still had the focused, slightly elevated energy of someone coming fresh off a completed procedure. She looked at the ultrasound image Maya had saved on the screen, and at the vitals on the monitor, and at Maya, and her face did the rapid calculation of a person doing math they're good at. "Grade 2 or 3? Okonkwo asked. "I'd put it at 2, trending toward 3 if we don't intervene," Maya said. "BP's been dropping for at least 40 minutes by the field timeline. We can try to manage conservatively." "We can try," Maya agreed. "But if he drops below 80 systolic, he's going straight to the OR and will have lost the conservative window." Okonkwo looked at Brooks. "Sir, I'm Dr. Okonkwo. I'm going to be your surgical resident tonight. Has Nurse Caldwell explained what we're looking at?" "Spleen," Brooks said. "Bleeding." "Correct. We're going to watch you very closely over the next 2 hours. If your numbers hold, we may be able to avoid surgery. If they don't hold, then we go to surgery," Brooks said. "I understand." Okonkwo looked at Mrs. when they're confirming that the patient isn't catastrophizing and the situation is being accurately described to him, and Maya gave her a small nod. "I'm going to order a CT to confirm the grade," Okonkwo said. "Then we'll talk about the path forward." She stepped out to make the call, and Maya stayed. Brooks's vitals held for the next 11 minutes. Not comfortably. His pressure was 94/61 and his heart rate hadn't come down from 116, but held. She watched the monitor, and she watched him, and she adjusted the fluid rate twice, and she charted continuously. At 1931, he said, "You don't have to stay." "Yes, I do," she said. "You're my patient." A pause. "Does that feel strange to you?" She glanced at him. "Do you want me to be honest, or do you want me to be reassuring?" He almost smiled. It looked like it cost him something. "Honest." "A little," she said, "but it doesn't change anything about how I'm doing my job." "No," he said, "I don't think it does." He was quiet for a moment. The monitor beeped steadily. I talked to Admiral Cross for 40 minutes this afternoon. I heard. He told me things about your record. He stopped. Not the classified parts, but enough. She waited. The Danvar Valley, he said carefully. That's not something I talk about. I know. He said that too. His eyes were on the ceiling. I need you to know that I understand. The scope of what I was wrong about. It wasn't just the clearance. No, she said. It wasn't. I implied you didn't earn your place in that room, and he stopped. His jaw moved. In general, I implied you were out of place. Yes. And you've never been out of place a day in your life. She looked at the monitor instead of him. The numbers were what she needed them to be. Not good numbers, not stable numbers, but the numbers of a situation she currently had a handle on. You were doing what your training tells you to do, she said. You assessed the situation with the information you had, and you acted. The problem wasn't the process. The problem was the assumption you started with. What assumption? That the person carrying the tray didn't belong at the table. Silence. That's a hard one to unlearn, she said. It's not just you. It's structural. It lives in the way these buildings are organized, in the way rank gets performed, and the way people who look like they're doing support work get treated by people who think they're doing important work. She paused. The work on the tray and the work at the table are the same work. I learned that in a different building a long time ago. Brooks was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Is that why you came back to nursing? She considered not answering. Then she said, Partly. What's the other part? She thought about the honest answer, which she had not given to anyone at Ravenport and very few people anywhere. She thought about Sousa's phone call and the briefing document that would be in her inbox by now, and the position that Sousa had called a formal one, and the words too valuable to stay invisible. I needed to remember why I started, she said. The monitor alarmed, not the catastrophic alarm, not the flatline tone or the critical threshold alert, but the step-down warning, the pressure alarm that meant his systolic had dropped below the threshold she'd set at 92. She was at the monitor before it finished its first beep. 88/57. Heart rate 124. Okonkwo, she called out. I need you now, Chet. The next 40 minutes were not what she would describe as controlled. They were managed, which was different. Managed the way you manage a situation that has more variables than you can simultaneously solve for, and you're making the best available decision at each moment with full knowledge that the moment after might require a different one. Okonkwo arrived in under a minute. Vasquez left Marsh, who had been stabilized and handed to the neurosurgery team, and came to Bay 2 to consult. They talked over the CT images that had come back at 1937. Confirmed grade 3 splenic laceration, moderate hemoperitoneum, the clean but serious imaging of a spleen that was doing what grade 3 lacerations do. And the conversation was fast and technical and professional. And when Maya said her piece, it was heard the same way Vasquez's and Okonkwo's pieces were heard, which was how it always should have been and was not always how it was. Angioembolization is a possibility, Vasquez said. If we can get interventional radiology down here in the next 20 minutes. His pressure's still dropping, Maya said, slowly, but it's not holding. He's young. His baseline vascular tone is, it's not holding, she said again. Not louder, just clearer. Every time we think we've stabilized him, he loses another 3 millimeters. At this rate, by the time IR sets up, we're operating in worse conditions than if we go now. Vasquez looked at Okonkwo. Okonkwo looked at the monitor. She's right, Okonkwo said. Vasquez was quiet for 2 seconds. Call the OR. Tell them we're coming up. Maya stepped back to Brooks. I was watching her again with the same focused attention. Not fearful exactly, or not only fearful, but present in the way of someone who has understood that things have become serious. We're going to surgery, she said. Okay. It's straightforward. Maya. He said her name, not her title, and she registered the shift without reacting to it. I know what it is. Don't manage me. She looked at him. Okay. Will you be there? I'm trauma nursing, she said. Or is a different, I know what OR is. His voice was still tight with pain, but there was something else in it, something direct. I'm asking if you'll be there. She held his gaze. I'll talk to Vasquez. That's not what I asked. Yes, she said. I'll be there. They took him up at 1958. Maya scrubbed in. Vasquez raised an eyebrow when she appeared at the scrub sink beside him, but he didn't say anything and she didn't offer an explanation, and they went in together. The procedure took 2 hours and 14 minutes. A grade 3 splenic laceration with ongoing hemorrhage. Vasquez repaired what could be repaired and removed what had to go. And the spleen came out in a clean splenectomy that was as uncomplicated as a splenectomy can be, which is to say there were 3 moments where it was not uncomplicated, and each of them required a decision made in real time by people who were good at this, and all 3 decisions were the right ones. Maya was a circulating nurse in the OR. She managed supplies, tracked instrument counts, monitored the patient's status from her position at the periphery. She was not the surgeon. She was not the scrub tech. She did what circulating nurses do, which is to be the system that keeps the room functioning while the people at the table focus on the table. She did it well. She did it completely without drama, without acknowledgement, without any signal that she was anything other than the nurse assigned to this case. At one point, Vasquez called for a specific retractor that wasn't on the instrument table, and she had it in his hand before he finished saying what he needed, and he looked at her over his mask for a fraction of a second, and she was already looking back at the instrument count. Brooks came out of anesthesia at 22:19. Recovery room, post-op bay 3, blood pressure 107/68, and climbing back towards something sustainable, color returning to a face that had spent the last 4 hours gray. Maya was not in the recovery room. She had gone back to the trauma ward at 21:45 when the OR nursing handoff was complete, and she had charted, and she had checked on Private Kerwin Dale, who was sleeping with his arm properly sutured and his mother asleep in the chair beside him, and she had submitted the end-of-shift documentation and changed out of her scrubs in the staff locker room. She was in the parking lot at 22:37 when her phone rang. Cross. She answered. "He's out of surgery," Cross said. "Vasquez briefed me." "Good." "He also told me you scrubbed in. The case needed a circulating nurse." Maya. He used the same tone he'd used in the conference room, the signal that the next thing mattered. "I've seen Sousa's briefing document." She stopped walking. The parking lot was mostly empty, the base quiet in the way military installations go quiet at night. Not fully silent, always a generator or a distant vehicle somewhere, but reduced. The stars were visible. She hadn't looked at the stars deliberately in a long time. "She sent it to you?" Maya asked. "She copied me," which she did intentionally and without subtlety. A brief pause. "Have you read it?" "Not yet." "Read it tonight." "Cross, I'm not ordering you," he said. "I'm asking, as someone who has known you for a long time and has watched you make yourself very small in a place that needed you to be bigger." He paused. "Read it tonight and then call me tomorrow." She looked at the stars. "And Caldwell," he said. "What you did in that OR tonight, Vasquez will document it. It'll be in Brooks's surgical record." Another pause. "Along with the fact that the nurse who led the initial trauma assessment called the internal bleed before imaging confirmed it and pushed for early OR intervention over conservative management was you." "I was doing my job," she said. "Yes," Cross said. "You were. That's the point." He hung up. She stood in the parking lot for another minute. Then she walked to her car, got in, and drove to her apartment 14 minutes off base, and she sat at the small table by the window where she kept her laptop, and she opened it, and she opened her email, and she found Sousa's briefing document, and she began to read. She read it twice, the second time more slowly. When she finished, she sat with the laptop open in front of her, and the room was quiet. And outside the window, the neighborhood was dark and ordinary. And she thought about everything the document said, and about what it meant, and about the 14 months she had spent becoming invisible, and whether that time had been what she'd needed it to be, or whether she had confused recovering with disappearing. She was still sitting there when her phone buzzed at 0043. A text. Unknown number, but the format of the message, its brevity, its precision, told her immediately who it was. I woke up. "They said you called the bleed. Thank you." "Brooks." She stared at it. Then, below it, another message from the same number, sent 30 seconds later. "Also, the Admiral told me about the position Sousa offered. I don't know if you'll take it, but if it matters, You shouldn't have to choose between being a nurse and being taken seriously. You should be able to be both. She put the phone down on the table beside the laptop. She looked at the briefing document still open on the screen. Then she picked the phone up again and typed a single line back to Brooks. "Get some sleep, Lieutenant." She hit send. She looked at the document for another long moment, and then she closed the laptop. But she didn't turn off the light. She sat in the quiet apartment with the light on and the phone face down on the table and the residue of a very long day settling around her. And she thought about the Danvar Valley and the 11 men she'd brought home and the cost of that mission that the official record had documented in partial and the classified addendum had described in full, and that she had spent 3 years trying to stop carrying the way she'd been carrying it. And then her phone lit up with an incoming call, and when she looked at the screen it was not Cross, and it was not Souza, and it was not a number she recognized. The area code was 609, San Diego. She stared at the screen through 2 rings, 3, the 4th beginning and cutting off as the caller hung up. A text arrived 4 seconds later. "We need to talk about Danvar. It's not what you were told. Call me." Reyes. The room went very still. Lieutenant Commander Sofia Reyes had been declared KIA in the Danvar Valley 3 years ago. Maya had read the casualty notification herself. She had attended the memorial. She picked up the phone and looked at the number, and her hand was completely steady. The same steadiness she brought to IV lines and instrument counts and decisions made in 4 seconds. But her heart was doing something it had not done in 3 years, which was the particular thing a heart does when the ground beneath a carefully constructed life begins to shift. She stared at the number for a long time. The text sat on the screen with the particular weight of something that could not be unseen. 3 years. The memorial had been at the Naval Air Station Chapel in Coronado. A gray November morning, a flag folded with the precise ceremony that the Navy reserved for its dead. A photograph of Sofia Reyes in her flight suit set on a table at the front of the room. Maya had sat in the 3rd row because the front 2 rows were for family, and she was not family. She was a wing commander and a colleague, and the person who had been flying the extraction bird that night, which meant she was also, in some architecture of guilt she had never fully dismantled, the person who had not brought Reyes home. Declared KIA. She turned that word over now. Declared. Not confirmed. Not identified. Declared. The administrative act of a system that had run out of other options, that had searched as long as it could search, and found nothing, and had to close the file, because files do not stay open indefinitely, no matter what they contain. She called the number back. It rang twice. Caldwell. The voice on the other end was Reyes. Unmistakably, physically, irreducibly Reyes. The low register and the slight coastal California flatness that had not changed at all, and that Maya's body recognized before her mind finished processing it. "I wasn't sure you'd call back tonight." Sophia. The name came out unsteadily, which was the first time Maya's voice had been unsteady in a very long time. "What? How?" "I can't do the full version on a cell line," Reyes said, "even a secure one. What I can tell you is that I'm alive and I'm in San Diego, and I've been trying to get to you for 6 weeks." 6 weeks? Maya stood up from the table. She was moving without deciding to move, the way her body sometimes handled things her conscious mind was still catching up to. "Where have you been for 3 years? A pause. "That's the part that needs a secure line and a room with a closed door." Another pause, shorter. I'm sorry I couldn't reach you sooner. I didn't know where you'd gone. Cross knew. He found me about 2 months ago, but he was being careful about how to—" "Cross knew," Maya said. "Yes." She stopped moving. She was standing in the middle of her apartment kitchen, and the refrigerator was humming, and the overhead light was doing what overhead lights do at midnight, which is make everything look slightly provisional. "He didn't tell me," she said. "No, he was— Caldwell, there are people involved in what happened at Danvar who are still inside the service. Active. Some of them in positions that matter. Cross was being careful about the sequence of how information moved." Reyes's voice was measured, but Maya could hear underneath it the particular quality of controlled urgency, the voice of someone who had been waiting to say something for a very long time. "He told me about today, about what happened at Ravenport. Today was— He said it was the thing that changed the timing. Once your cover was gone, the calculus changed." A breath. "The people who need to know you're talking to me. They're going to find out. And if they find out before we've got the record corrected, it creates a problem. What record? Danvar, Reyes said. The official record of Danvar is wrong, Maya. Not incomplete. Wrong. Deliberately. The kitchen was very quiet. Tell me what you can tell me on this line, Maya said. The abort order, Reyes said. The one that came in during the second pass. The one that said the site was compromised and to pull out. I know the abort order. It wasn't a legitimate order. It was generated inside the command structure by someone who wanted the mission to fail. Specifically, who needed certain people at that site to not come home. Maya sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically, not in collapse. She simply found the floor more stable than standing, and she sat on it with her back against the cabinet door. The 11 men who came out, she said. Were not the target, Reyes said. I was. And 2 others. The abort order was designed to leave the 3 of us at the site. You pulling us out on the second pass, that wasn't in their plan. You were on the primary extraction. You came out on the first. I didn't come out on the first pass, Maya. Reyes said it quietly. The manifest was falsified. I was moved off the primary list 6 hours before the mission by a command amendment that I didn't authorize and didn't know about until I was standing on the ground watching your bird lift without me. Maya closed her eyes. She remembered the second pass. The site was hot. They'd been taking fire from the eastern ridge for 4 minutes, which in an extraction under fire is an extremely long 4 minutes. And she had made the call to go back in against the abort order because the sensor data on her display had shown 2 heat signatures still on the ground, and she did not leave people on the ground, and she had never left people on the ground, and the abort order had told her to go, and she had weighed the order against the signatures, and she had gone back. She had always believed, or tried to believe, that what happened after that was an accident of war, a vehicle that was in the wrong position. The explosion that had separated Reyes from the extraction point in the last 60 seconds. The explosion, Maya said. Was not an accident, Reyes said. The refrigerator kept humming. Outside, somewhere on the street, a car passed and its headlights briefly moved across the kitchen ceiling. Who? Maya said. That, Reyes said, is what we need the closed room for. But I'll tell you this much. His name is not unknown to you, and he's been at Ravenport for 9 months. She didn't sleep. She lay on the bed fully dressed until 0400, and then she got up and made coffee and sat at the table with the laptop and Sousa's briefing document open and her phone beside it, and she read the document a 3rd time, and this time she read it differently. Not as an offer, but as a map. The position Sousa had described was formally titled Senior Military Advisor, Clinical Operations and Personnel Standards, a role attached to the Navy Surgeon General's office that would give Maya oversight authority across several joint military medical facilities, with a particular mandate around what the document called equity in personnel evaluation and advancement. It was in plain terms a role built to do exactly what she'd said to Brooks in the supply room, fix the structure, not just the individual. She had read it before as a professional opportunity. She read it now as a platform. At 0600, she texted Cross, I need to see you. In person. This morning. He replied in 4 minutes, 0730, my temporary office, East Wing. She showed up at 0725. Cross was alone, which told her he'd cleared the room deliberately. He had coffee, and he offered her some, and she took it because she hadn't slept. And the coffee at the East Wing offices was better than the staff kitchen variety. She sat across from him and looked at him steadily. Reyes called me last night, she said. Cross set down his cup. I know. You've known she was alive for 2 months. Yes. You didn't tell me. He met her eyes. No, I didn't. He didn't apologize and he didn't deflect, and she respected him enough to not need the apology, which didn't mean she wasn't angry. The person at Ravenport, she said, that Reyes mentioned. I'm aware of who she means. Tell me. Cross was quiet for a moment, not stalling, thinking the way he always thought before he said something that had consequences. Captain Gerald Sutter, he said. The name sat between them. Maya thought about Sutter in the corridor at EO 530 with his tablet and his mild irritation. She thought about him handing her a coffee tray and the particular way he'd said, I need bodies, and you're early, and the complete absence of anything in his demeanor that suggested he'd ever thought about her as a person with a history. She thought about the fact that he'd been at Ravenport for 9 months,
which meant he'd arrived 5 months after she did, which meant someone had put him here.
How much does he know about my record? She asked. We believe he knew before he arrived, Cross said. We believe his placement here was not coincidental. He was watching me. Monitoring is the more accurate word. As long as you stayed invisible, as long as you stayed in the role of an ordinary trauma nurse, you weren't a problem for him. You weren't talking. You weren't filing anything. You were exactly where someone needed you to be, where your full record would never be surfaced, and the questions about Danvar would stay buried. Maya looked at the coffee in her hands. Yesterday, she said, when he assigned me to the briefing setup, he may not have known Cross was coming, Cross said, referring to himself in the third person with the slight awkwardness of a man aware of the oddity. My visit wasn't widely announced. When it was announced, it was on short notice. He paused. Or he sent you into that room knowing exactly what would happen. To see how I'd handle it. To see if your cover would hold. If you'd keep your head down even under pressure from Brooks. He looked at her steadily. You did keep your head down. You were leaving, until he said what he said about the insignia. I would have left, she said. Except that was the one thing I couldn't let stand. I know, Cross said, and I think he counted on that. I think the lieutenant was incidental. I think the assignment to that room, that morning, with that particular group of officers, I think it was designed to surface you, either to confirm you were neutralized or to expose you and create the destabilization that brings Danvar back into play, Maya said. Yes. She put the coffee down. She thought for a moment about the order of things, about the supply room and Brooks's apology, and then the rollover accident and the hours in the OR, and then Sousa's call, and then Reyes. And she thought about how a sequence of events can look like chaos until you look at it from the right position and see that it has a shape. The rollover, she said. Brooks and Marsh. Cross's face changed. Not dramatically. He was too controlled for dramatic. But the quality of his stillness shifted. We're looking at that, he said. It was a training road, north perimeter access. Not a high-traffic route. No. And Brooks had just spent the afternoon telling your aide and presumably others that he'd gone to you, that he'd apologized to me, that he... She stopped. He made himself visible, after spending the morning making me visible. Yes, Cross said. That's the concern. Is Marsh going to be okay? Vasquez says the next 24 hours are critical. The head injury is significant. Cross looked at her directly. He has 2 kids, 7 and 4. She absorbed that. What do you need from me? Sousa's offer, he said, the formal position. I haven't answered her yet, I know. But I need you to understand something before you do. He leaned forward slightly. If you accept that position, you have institutional standing to initiate a personnel review that goes above my authority and above Sousa's authority. You have the standing to pull Sutter's full placement record, his security clearances, his communications history from the 9 months he's been here. He paused. As a nurse, you have none of that. You could initiate a review without me. I could, and I'm going to... That's already in motion. But what I can access as a visiting admiral is finite. What you can access with Sousa's mandate behind you is considerably less finite. He looked at her. I'm not asking you to take the position because of Danvar. I'm asking because it's the right role for you, and it has been for 2 years. But I'd be dishonest if I didn't tell you that the timing is relevant. She looked out the window. The base was moving into its morning rhythm. Vehicles on the roads, personnel crossing the parade ground, the ordinary machinery of a large institution beginning its day. If I accept formally, she said, Sutter will know. If he's been monitoring me, he'll know within hours. Yes, and he'll move. Probably. Which means we need to be ready for whatever he moves toward. Which means, Cross said, that I need your answer today. Oh, she gave it at 0900. She called Sousa directly and said yes, clearly, without qualification, and Sousa received it with the brisk satisfaction of someone who had been waiting on a bureaucratic bottleneck to clear and could now proceed. The formal documentation would take 72 hours to process. In the meantime, Sousa confirmed, Maya's authority to request personnel records and initiate an advisory review was effective immediately upon verbal confirmation, a provision built into the role specifically for situations requiring urgent action. Maya hung up and sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she went to work. Not to the trauma ward. She called Felicity, explained she would be off floor for the day on administrative matters, and Felicity said, "Okay," in a tone that communicated she had more questions than she was going to ask, and Maya said she'd explain as soon as she could, and that was the conversation. She spent the next 4 hours in the East Wing with a Naval Personnel Command liaison named Specialist Dara Watts, the same Watts who had told her about Brooks's meeting with Cross the previous afternoon, going through 9 months of Captain Gerald Sutter's facility access records, communications logs, and personnel action filings. Watts was 23 years old and extremely good at databases, and she was also, Maya noted, the kind of person who would not be here doing this if Cross hadn't pre-positioned her, which meant Cross had been moving pieces for longer than this morning. The access records were first. Sutter had badged into the East Wing Secure Communications Suite 11 times in the past 9 months, not unusual for a deputy director of clinical operations who had legitimate administrative reasons to use secure communications, except that 3 of those accesses occurred outside his documented meeting schedule, 2 were on weekends, and 1, the most recent, had occurred 4 days ago at 0218 in the morning. 0288, Maya said. Yes, ma'am. Watts had stopped calling her nurse Caldwell somewhere in the second hour and had arrived at ma'am without apparent deliberation. No documented reason on file. What's the normal access pattern for that suite at 021 Essentially none, Watts said. Emergency communications occasionally. Deployed unit contact, that kind of thing. But standard administrative personnel don't typically flag all 3 off-schedule accesses. Maya moved to the next file. Personnel actions. What's he filed in the last 30 days? Watts pulled the list. There were 14 personnel actions filed by Sutter in the past 30 days. 8 were routine. Scheduling, credentials review, the ordinary paper trail of managing a clinical staff. 3 were performance notations on nursing staff. 2 were standard. 1 was a formal counseling notation on a trauma nurse named Brennan, the same ward tech Brennan who had been in the bay the night before helping Maya work up Brooks. Why does Brennan have a counseling notation? Maya asked. Watts looked at the file. It says, Procedure Non-Compliance, Medication Logging Protocol. She scrolled. Filed 8 days ago. Maya thought about Brennan in that bay. His hands were precise. His logging was clean. She'd worked beside him enough times to know what careful looked like. Pull Brennan's full performance record, she said. I want to know if there's any prior notation or if this appears clean. Watts pulled it. Clean. 4 years at Ravenport, 2 commendations, no prior counseling actions. He logged something 8 days ago, Maya said. Something that Sutter didn't want logged. I can't access the specific medication logs without... I know. Flag it, and we'll get the access through Sousa's office. She moved to the next item. The last 3 personnel actions in Sutter's filing were the ones that stopped her. Transfer requests. 3 of them, filed in the past 2 weeks. For 3 trauma nurses who had been, by Maya's direct knowledge, the most experienced members of the overnight staff. The people most likely to notice an anomaly, most likely to ask a question about a patient who wasn't supposed to be there or a medication that didn't match a chart. None of the transfer requests had been processed yet. They were sitting in the pipeline. Who approved the initiation of these requests? Maya asked. Watts checked. Sutter filed them directly to personnel. They haven't hit a second approval yet. Kill them, Maya said. Administrative hold pending the advisory review. Do it now. Watts typed. Done. Maya sat back. She looked at the pattern in front of her. The off-hours secure access, the clean employee with a sudden counseling notation, the transfer request targeting specific experienced staff. And she thought about what it meant. Not in abstract, not theoretically, but in the concrete terms of someone who had spent her career reading tactical situations. Sutter had been preparing. Quietly, methodically, over weeks. Building himself a cleaner environment. Fewer eyes, fewer experienced people who might notice the wrong thing, better access to communication channels he didn't need legitimate access to. And now, in the last 24 hours, everything had accelerated. Her cover was gone. Cross was here. And someone had been driving on the North Perimeter Access Road last night when 2 officers connected to her went off the road. She was still sitting with that thought when Watts said quietly, Ma'am, you should see this. She turned. Watts had found something in the communications log that wasn't a badge access. It was a facility phone record, An outgoing call from the East Wing administrative desk at 1847 the previous evening. 1847. 22 minutes before Felicity had texted her about the incoming casualties. The call had been placed to an external number. The number had a North Carolina area code. Watts had cross-referenced it against base directory records and found no match, which was consistent with either a personal cell number or a number that had been deliberately excluded from official records. "Can we trace the receiving number?" Maya asked. "Not through the channels I have access to right now," Watts said. "But I can flag it for—" The door opened. Captain Gerald Sutter walked in. He stopped when he saw Maya. He looked at Watts, he looked at the screen. He looked at Maya again, and something moved in his face that he covered with the smoothness of long practice. The face of a man who had learned to manage his expressions in environments where expressions were liabilities. "Caldwell," he said, "I heard you were doing some kind of administrative review." "That's right," she said. "Personnel Command Liaison?" He looked at Watts with the studied neutrality of a senior officer addressing a junior one. "Specialist Watts is assisting with a Sousa mandate review," Maya said. "I've been formally appointed to the senior advisor role as of this morning." Sutter processed this. The processing was visible, fractional, controlled, but visible to someone watching for it. "Congratulations," he said. "Thank you." "What's the scope of the review?" "Personnel records, facility access logs, and staffing actions going back 9 months. She held his gaze. "It's routine for a new appointment." 9 months is specific, he said. "It corresponds to the staffing period under your management," she said. "Standard baseline." He was quiet for a moment. "Anything I can help you with? I have access to most of the clinical operations records you'd need." "I'll reach out if we have questions," Maya said. "Thank you, Captain." He stood in the doorway for another beat. His eyes went briefly to the screen where Watts had been working, and Watts, with the particular presence of mind of someone who was 23 and paying close attention, had already minimized the communications log. "Of course," Sutter said. He left. Maya looked at the door for a moment after it closed. "He saw enough," Watts said quietly. "Yes." Maya turned back to the screen. "How long do we have before he moves?" "That call at 1847. If he made it to whoever was involved in the accident, then he already moved last night," Maya said. "What we're looking at now is what he does next." She thought for a moment. "Flag everything we've found for cross. Full package, formatted for a JAG review. How quickly can you do that?" 2 hours if I stay on it." "Stay on it." Maya stood. "I need to do something else." She went to see Brooks at 1315. He was in a recovery room on the 2nd floor, post-op day 1, looking considerably better than he had on a gurney the previous evening, but still with the particular fragility of someone whose body had been opened and repaired and was now in the negotiation phase of recovery. He was sitting up. There was a tray with hospital food that he'd made a partial effort at. "You look terrible," she said. "Thank you," he said. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't." She sat in the chair beside the bed. "How's the pain?" "Managed. Vasquez came by this morning, said I'd be here another 4 or 5 days. He looked at her. "He also said you called the internal bleed before imaging confirmed it. The presentation was consistent. He said if you'd waited for the CT results to push for OR, the window might have closed." "Possibly." Brooks was quiet for a moment. "My mother called this morning," he said. "She asked me who my nurse was, and I told her, and she asked if you were good, and I told her you were the best nurse at this hospital." He paused, "which I realize I'm not actually qualified to assess, but it felt true." "It's true," Maya said, without false modesty, because it was accurate. He looked at her. "What happened last night? The accident?" "We're looking at it," she said. "We?" "Cross and I, and others." She watched his face. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." "Okay." "The North Perimeter Road. Why were you on it at 1830? He frowned. "Marsh asked me if I wanted to see the motor pool improvements they'd done on the north end. I said yes. We were heading back when— Who knew you were going?" "I don't know. I told my aide where I'd be. Marsh probably told his supervisor." He stopped. "Why?" "Because that road is not a standard route, and the timing is specific." She kept her voice level. "I don't want to alarm you, but there's a review underway, and that accident is part of what's being looked at. Brooks was very still. Are you saying it wasn't an accident? I'm saying we don't know yet. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it, the way his face moved through the implications, the officer's mind doing the tactical work that he'd been trained to do. The person who... He stopped. Sutter, he said. She didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. He's the one who sent you into the briefing, Brooks said, with the tray. That morning. Yes.
Yes. And I was the one who... He stopped again. His jaw tightened. I was the one who made the scene, who made you visible. He looked at her with something complicated in his face. He used me. Possibly, she said, or the scene in the briefing was incidental. We don't know his full plan yet. But if he needed you visible, he needed something. We're still working out what. Brooks was quiet. Then, what do you need from me? A written statement about the events of yesterday morning. Your decision to go with Marsh on the North Perimeter Road. Who knew about it? The timeline. Everything you remember. She paused. And I need you to be careful about who you talk to about this conversation. I'm in a hospital bed, he said. My options are limited. Good, she said. And then, because she was aware of how that sounded. That's not... I don't mean... I know what you mean, he said, and almost smiled again. She stood to leave. Maya, he said. She stopped. He'd used her first name again, and this time she didn't process it as a shift. It simply sounded like what she was. Yesterday morning, he said, in the conference room, when the Admiral said your name. He was choosing words carefully. Your face didn't change. When everyone else in the room was reacting, you were just standing there, like it wasn't happening to you. Years of practice, she said. No, he said. I don't think that's what it was. He looked at her steadily. I think you genuinely didn't need it. The recognition. You weren't standing there waiting for anyone to understand who you were. You already knew. She looked at him for a moment. Get some rest, Lieutenant, she said. She left the room and walked down the corridor and took the stairs back to the east wing, and by the time she reached the door, she had moved through what Brooks said and past it and into the next thing, which was the thing she did when something landed close. She kept walking toward it instead of around it. Watts had the JAG package ready at 1547. It was thorough. 11 items flagged, documented, sourced. The off-hours communication suite accesses. The counseling notation on Brennan. The transfer requests on the 3 experienced nurses. The 1847 call. And 3 additional items Watts had found in the final hour. A discrepancy in Sutter's personnel placement record that showed a 9-month gap between his previous posting and Ravenport with no documented assignment, a gap that shouldn't exist for an active duty 06, and 2 encrypted message receipts from the facility's administrative system that had been sent from Sutter's access credentials and had no corresponding logged content. The encrypted messages, Maya said. Can JAG access the content? With a court order, yes. The metadata alone is enough to support the request. Send the package to Cross. Send a copy to Sousa, and flag it for the JAG office at the base command level. Maya looked at the time, 1549. How long will Cross need to review it? He said to send it the moment it was ready. He's been waiting. She looked at the package on the screen. 11 clean, documented items, each one a thread in a fabric that, taken together, had a shape. Not proof of everything, but enough. Enough for the next step, which was not her step, but the institution's step, the formal mechanism of accountability that she had trusted once and been failed by and was, despite everything, trusting again. Send it, she said. Watts sent it. At 1617, Cross called her. I've reviewed it, he said. I've spoken to JAG. We're initiating a formal investigation. Sutter will be notified of his restricted status by 1800. He'll lawyer up immediately, she said. Yes. But the encrypted messages are enough for the court order, and the court order is enough to get the content and... Cross stopped. In the pause, she could hear him deciding something. There's one more thing. The JAG office flagged something in the placement gap that Watts found. The 9 months. What about it? It wasn't a gap, Cross said. It was a classified assignment. His personnel record was amended to show the gap retroactively. The original record shows he was attached to a joint intelligence unit. Which unit? Cross said a name. Maya sat very still.
It was the same unit that had issued the abort order during Operation Winter Passage. She looked at the wall of the East Wing office, and she thought about that night in the Danvar Valley. The heat signatures on her display, the decision she'd made in 4 seconds, the abort order she had defied, and the explosion that had, officially, killed Sophia Reyes. "How was inside the command structure?" she said. "At Danvar." "We believe so," Cross said, "which means what happened last night on the North Perimeter Road was not about yesterday's briefing," Maya said. "It was about 3 years ago." "Yes," Cross said. "And Caldwell? There's one more thing. I need you to hear this carefully." He paused. "Reyes landed at Wilmington 40 minutes ago. She's being escorted to Ravenport now. She's asked to speak with Jag tonight." Another pause. "And she's asked for you to be there." The room was very quiet. "There's something else," Maya said. Not a question. She could hear it in the specific quality of his pause. "What aren't you telling me?" A long pause. And then Cross said, "When Jag pulled the classified assignment record and cross-referenced the personnel who were attached to that joint intelligence unit during the Danvar period, there were 6 names. Sutter was one." "And the others?" "2 are retired," Cross said. "One is deceased. One is stationed overseas." He paused for the last time, and in that pause Maya understood the shape of what was coming before the words arrived. "And one of them," Cross said, "is currently the base commander of Fort Ravenport." The base commander of Fort Ravenport was Brigadier General Marcus Holt. Maya knew him the way she knew most people at Ravenport, by function, by title, by the occasions when his office generated paperwork that affected the hospital. I was 54, a career Army officer, the kind of institutional fixture who had been in place long enough that his presence felt structural rather than personal. He attended the quarterly medical command briefings. He had spoken at 2 memorial services since her arrival. He had on one occasion passed her in the corridor outside the trauma ward and nodded without making eye contact, the nod of a senior officer acknowledging support staff in a way that was technically polite and practically invisible. She had spent 14 months being invisible to him. She stood in the East Wing office with the phone against her ear, and she thought about what that meant now. What it meant that the man who had walked past her without seeing her had 3 years earlier been attached to the same unit that had sent a false abort order into the Danvar Valley and left Sophia Reyes on the ground. "Does Holt know about the JAG package?" she asked. "Not yet," Cross said. "JAG is moving carefully. If he's notified prematurely, he'll move first," Maya said. "The same way Sutter was already moving." "Yes." "How much time do we have before the 1800 notification to Sutter?" 40 minutes. She did the arithmetic. 40 minutes before Sutter knew he was restricted. If he and Holt were communicating, and the encrypted messages suggested they were, then Holt would know within the hour. And Holt had base command authority that Sutter didn't have. He could move resources, personnel, access. He could create complications that would take weeks to untangle. "The JAG office," she said. "Who's the senior attorney on base?" "Lieutenant Colonel Dara Fenn. She's already been briefed. She's read the package." "And Reyes?" "En route. 40 minutes out, maybe less." "She's the key," Maya said. "Whatever Holt did at Danvar, Reyes was there. She survived it. Her testimony is the thing that changes a documentary record into a prosecutable case." She paused. "We need her to get here before Sutter's notification goes out." "I know. Can JAG delay the notification?" "I've already made that request. Fenn is coordinating the timing." A brief pause. "There's one more thing I need to tell you, and I need you to hear it as information, not as a problem to solve." She waited. "Holt's office submitted a request this afternoon to review your personnel transfer records, specifically the records pertaining to your clearance reinstatement when you arrived at Ravenport." "He's looking for a procedural basis," she said, "to challenge my appointment, or to challenge your presence here entirely. If he can find a gap in the intake clearance process, anything irregular, there isn't one." "I know, but the request itself tells us he knows about Sousa's appointment, which means someone in the personnel pipeline told him, which means we have a secondary leak somewhere between Washington and here." Cross was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry, Maya. This got complicated faster than I'd hoped." "It was always going to get complicated," she said. "I just didn't know who was standing in the room when it did." She hung up and looked at Watts. "How fast can you get me a printed copy of the JAG package?" 2 minutes. "Print it, 2 copies." She stood and pulled on her jacket. and then go home. Watts looked at her. Ma'am, you've done everything I needed, Maya said. What comes next isn't your part. Go home, don't discuss what you've seen today with anyone on base, and don't answer your phone if the call comes from Sutter's office or the base commander's office. She met the younger woman's eyes. I mean that. I'll explain why later, but right now I need you to trust me. Watts held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once and went to the printer. She met Cross in the corridor outside the JAG suite at 1712. He had Colonel Taft with him, which she hadn't expected, and Lieutenant Colonel Fenn was already inside. Maya could see her through the glass partition, a lean woman in her late 40s, with close-cropped hair and the organized desk of someone who treated her workspace the way a surgeon treats an instrument tray. Everything exactly where it needed to be. Reyes is 12 minutes out, Cross said. Good. Maya handed him one copy of the printed package and kept the other. The secondary leak in the personnel pipeline. Fenn is already on it. She's requested a temporary communications freeze on outgoing traffic from the base commander's office. Holt's aide will be told it's a routine security audit. He'll know it isn't. He'll suspect. But suspicion isn't action. Cross looked at her directly. How are you doing? The question landed with a specificity she hadn't expected. Not the professional, are you ready of a commander assessing an asset, but the human question, the one that acknowledged that the last 36 hours had contained enough to dismantle a person who was built for less. I'm okay, she said. Then, because it was Cross and accuracy mattered, I'm managing. That's all I needed to know. He pushed the JAG suite door open. Let's go. Fenn received them with the efficiency of someone who had read everything and was ready to act on it. She confirmed the package, confirmed the timeline, confirmed that the Sutter notification had been delayed pending Reyes's arrival. And then she asked Maya 3 precise questions about the Danvar abort order. What she remembered, what she'd been told officially, and what she had never been told. And Maya answered them with the same precision, the same factual sequence, the same absence of editorializing that she'd brought to every difficult thing in her adult life. Fenn wrote 3 lines of notes. She looked up. When Reyes arrives, she said, I'll need her account separately before I put you both in the same room. Standard protocol. I don't want anyone suggesting the accounts were coordinated. Understood, Maya said. This is going to move fast once it starts, Fenn said. Holt will have access to base legal counsel, and he'll use it. Sutter will lawyer up the moment the notification goes out. We have a window between now and when those 2 legal teams start communicating, and that window is where everything important is going to happen. She looked at Maya steadily. I need you to be prepared for the possibility that tonight gets loud. Loud how? Holt may attempt to invoke base command authority to interrupt the investigation. He has limited grounds, but he has some, and a man in his position with his back against a wall is going to use every inch of ground he has. She paused. Cross's rank is the counterweight, but you should be prepared. Maya thought about loud. She had flown strike missions in degraded weather with inoperative avionics while taking fire from 2 directions and making real-time decisions about human life. She had some capacity for loud. I'm prepared, she said. The door opened and a young MP looked in. Admiral Cross? They're here. Sophia Reyes walked into Fort Ravenport Medical Center at 1731, and the first thing Maya noticed was that she walked differently. Not badly, not damaged, not diminished, but differently. There was a deliberateness to it, the careful placement of someone who had learned at some point in the last 3 years to move through unfamiliar spaces with extra attention. Her face was the same face, older in the particular way of people who have lived outside of ordinary time. Not aged exactly, but weighted. She was in civilian clothes, dark jacket, and she had lost some of the ease she'd always carried in uniform, the natural fluency of someone whose body had always known exactly where it was in the hierarchy. She saw Maya across the corridor. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Reyes walked forward, and Maya walked forward, and they met in the middle of the corridor, and Reyes put a hand on Maya's shoulder, and Maya put a hand on her arm, and for about 4 seconds neither of them said anything at all, because there was nothing available to say that was adequate to 3 years and a memorial, and the sound of an explosion that Maya had been telling herself for 1,000 nights was not her fault. You're here, Maya said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. I've been trying to get here, Reyes said. Her voice was rough. I'm sorry it took this long. Later, Maya said. We're going to talk about all of it later, but right now Fen needs you. Reyes nodded. She straightened, and Maya watched her pull something back into alignment, the same way Maya had watched herself do it in mirrors for years, the reassembly of a person who has things to do and cannot afford to fall apart while doing them. I'm ready, Reyes said. I know, Maya said. You always were. Fen interviewed Reyes for 41 minutes. Maya waited in the corridor with Cross and Taft and did not listen at the door, which took more effort than she would have preferred to admit. She sat in one of the institutional chairs, and she held the copy of the JAG package in her hands, and she read it again. Not because she didn't know what was in it, but because reading gave her hands something to do. At 1823, Fen came out. We have enough, she said. We have more than enough. She looked at Cross. I'm initiating the restricted status notifications for both Sutter and Holt simultaneously. If we do them sequentially, there's a window for communication between them. Simultaneously closes that window. Agreed, Cross said. I'll need an MP escort to the base commander's office, Fen said. That's standard for a command-level restriction. I'm requesting it now. She looked at Maya. I want you present. Me? Not formally, not in a JAG capacity. But I want you in the building when this happens. Fen's expression was precise. Because when Holt is notified, I expect he's going to attempt to make this about your record, your appointment, the legitimacy of the personnel review you initiated today. And I want someone present who can answer those questions from personal knowledge. He's going to argue the review was improperly initiated, Maya said. He's going to try. I want to be ready for that argument the moment he makes it. She paused. You've been invisible here for 14 months. Tonight, I need you visible. Maya thought about what Cross had said in the East Wing office that morning. Too valuable to stay invisible. She thought about Sousa's voice on the phone. She thought about Reyes walking through the corridor and the weight on her face and the 3 years of living outside of ordinary time. I'll be there, she said. They moved at 1847. 2 teams, 2 locations, coordinated timing. Fen and a JAG paralegal to the base commander's office. Cross's aide and the base MP commander to Sutter's administrative office on the 2nd floor of the hospital. Maya with Fen's team, Taft with Cross's. She had never been to Holt's office. It was on the far side of the base administrative building, 3rd floor, with a view of the parade ground that she registered peripherally as they walked through the door. The broad rectangle of maintained grass going amber in the evening light. The flag at half-staff for a training casualty from 3 weeks ago. The base carrying its ordinary weight. Holt's aide, a young captain named Griggs, stood up from her desk when they came in, the instinctive response to an unexpected formal entry, and started to say something that got absorbed by Fen's clear, measured. We're here to speak with General Holt. Please let him know. Griggs looked at the MP escort. She picked up the phone. 30 seconds later, Holt came through the inner office door. He was in service dress, which suggested he'd had some advance awareness that this hour might require it. His face was controlled in the way that senior officers' faces are controlled. Not blank, not cold, but managed, the way a building is managed by a good facilities team. Everything functioning, nothing obviously breaking down, the maintenance work invisible. He looked at Fen. He looked at the MPs. He looked at Maya. Something moved in his face when he looked at Maya. Not guilt. It wasn't readable as guilt. Not yet. It was the look of a man recalculating, a look she had seen in briefing rooms and command decisions, and the expressions of people who have just discovered that the situation is further along than they thought. General Holt, Fen said. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Dara Fen, JAG. I'm here to inform you that effective immediately you are placed on administrative restriction pending a formal investigation into your activities during and following Operation Winter Passage, specifically your role as a member of the Joint Intelligence Unit attached to the operation in the Danvar Valley. Holt said nothing. You are required to surrender your access credentials and remain on base, Fen continued. You retain the right to legal counsel, and I advise you to contact your attorney immediately. Do you understand these terms? A long silence. I understand, Holt said. His voice was even. That was the thing that struck Maya. How even his voice was. How much practice it represented. I have questions, he said. You can direct those to your legal counsel, Fen said. I have questions for Caldwell, he said. He looked at Maya directly, and she looked back, and she did not look away. "What questions?" she said. "Not a question." "Your clearance at intake," he said. "There were procedural irregularities in your reinstatement file. I submitted a review request this afternoon." "I'm aware of the request," Maya said. "There were no irregularities. My clearance was properly processed at intake. Sousa's office has confirmed the record." She paused. "The review request has been noted as part of the pattern of activity we're investigating." Something shifted in Holt's face. Not dramatically, but the evenness cracked slightly at the edges, the way a surface cracks under pressure that is finally, after a long time, sufficient. "You've been a nurse here," he said. "For 14 months you've been a nurse." "Yes." "And now you're—" He stopped. "Still a nurse," she said. "And other things." She held his gaze. "I was other things the whole time. You knew that." He said nothing. "You knew who I was when Sutter was placed here," she said. "You knew when the counseling notation went on Brennan's record. You knew when the transfer requests went in for the overnight staff." She kept her voice level, factual, the way she kept everything, not to deny the anger underneath it, but because the anger wasn't what this moment needed. "You knew, and you were quiet about it, and you walked past me in that corridor 14 months ago, and you looked at me and you didn't see me, and I don't know if that was strategy or if it was genuine, if you just couldn't see a nurse as someone who mattered. But I'm standing here now, and everything you were trying to keep buried is on Fenn's desk." Holt stood very still. "I want my attorney," he said. "That's your right," Fenn said. "Captain Griggs, please assist the General with that call. Sergeant Waverly, please log the credential surrender." It took 9 minutes. Maya stood and watched. She did not feel triumphant. She had never been built for triumph, which required a certain quality of wanting to win that she didn't fully have. What she felt was something more specific and less dramatic, the sensation of a weight that had been pressing against her for 3 years beginning, very slowly, to lift. The notifications went out simultaneously. Sutter's restriction was delivered at 1849, 2 minutes after Holt's, and the result was what Fenn had predicted: immediate contact with base legal, which hit a temporary block because base legal was now subject to its own access restrictions given Holt's involvement, and the resulting confusion bought the JAG investigation exactly the clean hours it needed to log, document, and secure everything that had been found. Reyes gave her formal statement to Fenn at 20:30. It took 2.5 hours. Maya knew the broad shape of what it contained because Reyes had told her the night before, but the formal version, structured for a legal record, specific with names and times and command designations, was something else. It was the account of a woman who had spent 3 years in a situation she could not fully detail on an unsecured line, who had been kept from coming forward by a combination of legitimate security concerns and the genuine fear that the people who had left her in the Danvar Valley were still in positions to respond to her reappearance in ways she could not control. Cross had found her 2 months ago through a contact in naval intelligence who had, quietly and without official authorization, flagged an anomaly in the casualty records from Danvar, a discrepancy in the DNA identification that had been used to officially close her case. Cross had spent 2 months building the structural foundation to receive her account safely. The appointment of Maya to the senior advisor role, Sousa's involvement, the JAG coordination, none of it had been improvised. All of it had been prepared. Maya understood this when Reyes told her, at midnight, in the small family waiting room at the end of the JAG suite corridor, where they had finally been given 20 minutes that were neither formal nor recorded. "He never told me," Maya said. She meant Cross. She meant the 2 months of preparation. "He was protecting the sequence," Reyes said. "If you knew I was alive before the structure was ready, you would have—" "I would have moved too fast," Maya said. "Yes." "He was right." "He usually is," Reyes said, "which is annoying." Maya almost laughed. It came out slightly wrong, too rough, too much history in it, but it was real. "The Danvar Valley," Maya said. "The second pass, when I went back—" "You weren't supposed to," Reyes said. "The abort order was designed to make sure you didn't. They knew your record. They knew you were aggressive on extractions. They thought the order would hold you." She paused. "They didn't know you well enough." "I almost didn't go back," Maya said. "The abort order was legitimate in format. I second-guessed myself for about 4 seconds." "I know," Reyes said. "Those 4 seconds saved my life."
She looked at Maya steadily. You've been carrying Danvar for 3 years like it was something you survived badly. You didn't survive it badly. You survived it against every obstacle they put in front of you. Maya looked at the table between them. The family waiting room had a low table with a box of tissues and a potted plant that needed water. The plant was doing its best. I thought you were dead, Maya said. I read the notification. I sat at the memorial. I know. I'm not saying it to... I know why you're saying it, Reyes said. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't reach you sooner. I'm sorry you carried that. She paused. I'm here now. Yes, Maya said. You are. The formal investigation into Marcus Holt and Gerald Sutter was transferred to Naval Criminal Investigative Service 3 days later, which was the appropriate jurisdiction for a case that crossed service branches and involved classified operations. The transfer was clean and well documented, which was the result of Fenn's meticulous preparation and the 72 hours that had passed between the initial restriction and the handoff. Holt was relieved of command at Yeo 900 on the 4th day. It was not a dramatic ceremony. There was no public announcement, no parade ground assembly. He was relieved administratively, his credentials deactivated, his office cleared under JAG supervision. He walked out of the Fort Ravenport Administrative Building at 0923, and he got into a vehicle and he was driven to temporary quarters on the far end of the base, and that was the end of Marcus Holt's 31-year career. Maya heard about it from Taft, who called her at 0940 while she was in the trauma ward. She was in the middle of a dressing change. She held the phone against her ear with one shoulder and kept working with her hands, because Private Kerwin Dale, still here, still healing slower than she'd have liked on the rib front, had a dressing that needed changing regardless of what was happening in the administrative building. It's done, Taft said. Okay, she said. That's it? Okay. What would you like me to say, Colonel? A pause. I don't know, something more than okay. She looked at Kerwin's arm, the wound closing cleanly, the tissue doing what tissue does when it's given the right environment. Okay is honest, she said. It's done, and it should have been done, and I'm glad it's done, and I'm also still in the middle of a shift. She heard Taft almost laugh. Fair enough, he said. Cross wants to see you at 1400. I'll be there. She hung up and finished the dressing and checked Kerwin's vitals and made a note in his chart and moved to the next room. Sutter's case was more complicated than Holt's, which was the nature of cases that involved operational security files and encrypted communications and a 9-month record of methodical preparation. He had legal counsel by 1900 on the first night, and his attorney filed 3 procedural motions in the first 48 hours, all of which Fenn handled with the calm efficiency of someone who had read the JAG package more times than Sutter's attorney had read anything. The encrypted messages, when the court order came through, contained what Fenn described to Maya in precise, unemotional terms as a comprehensive operational record of monitoring activity. Sutter had been tracking Maya's movements, her shift records, her patient contacts, her access patterns, not constantly, not obsessively, but regularly, with the particular discipline of someone maintaining a surveillance task alongside other responsibilities. He had filed reports to an external contact whose identity the NCIS was still working to establish. And he had, on the evening of the North Perimeter rollover, placed a call to a number that was now, 3 days into the investigation, linked to a former base motor pool contractor with a documented connection to Holt's previous posting. The rollover investigation was ongoing. Marsh was out of the ICU. His prognosis was cautiously positive, which was the most honest thing the neurosurgery team could say, and Maya accepted it as honestly as it was offered. She visited him once, on the second day, with his wife's permission, a quiet woman named Loretta, who had arrived from Jacksonville with the 7-year-old and the 4-year-old and the exhausted ferocity of a person who has just learned that the ordinary Tuesday her husband had left for had turned into something else. Maya sat with her for 20 minutes in the family waiting room while Marsh slept and answered Loretta's questions as accurately as she could, which meant not making promises she couldn't keep, but also not withholding the honest assessment, which was that Marsh was fighting and the numbers were moving in the right direction. He's young, Maya said. His brain is healthy. Those 2 things matter more than people expect. Loretta looked at her steadily. Is that the nurse talking or someone who's seen worse? Both, Maya said. Loretta nodded, the nod of a woman who appreciated being talked to directly. Okay, she said. Okay.
Brooks was discharged on day 5. He came to find Maya before he left. He was in civilian clothes, the first time she'd seen him out of uniform, and he looked like someone on the far side of something, not healed exactly, but past the acute part. He found her in the medication room, same as before. She had a theory that the medication room was where important conversations happened at Ravenport, or maybe just the ones that were too specific for corridors. "I'm being transferred," he said. "I heard. Fort Meridian, I requested it." He paused. I thought starting somewhere else made sense." "It does," she said. "The review board is still pending, the conduct review from the briefing." He said it without deflecting. "I'm not appealing it." She looked at him. "That's going to go on your record." "I know." His jaw was set in the particular way she'd come to understand meant he'd made a decision he wasn't entirely comfortable with but was committed to. "It should. I said what I said. The investigation might account for Sutter's involvement in setting up that morning, but that doesn't change the fact that I made the choice to push it the way I pushed it." He met her eyes. "Accountability without context, right?" "I didn't say that." "No," he said, "but I've been thinking about it. About what you said in the supply room. That it's structural, the assumption about who belongs where. That it lives in the way buildings are organized." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been that structure. Without knowing it, but also without asking. And not knowing isn't the same as not responsible." She looked at him for a moment. The medication room was the same as it always was. Shelving, inventory, the faint chemical smell of a room that is used for a specific purpose. It was 28, and he had been wrong, and he had been used, and he had almost died, and he was standing here choosing accountability over explanation. "Fort Meridian has good people," she said. "I know, I looked it up." He almost smiled. "I also looked up who's going to be running the new senior advisor program. Sousa's office sent the announcement this morning." He looked at her steadily. "You're going to do something with that role." "I'm going to try." "You're going to do something with it," he said again, firmly, the same way she'd corrected him in the conference room. "I've seen enough to know the difference." She held out her hand. He shook it, a real handshake, the kind that carries weight in both directions. "Take care of yourself, Lieutenant," she said. "You too, Commander," he said. He said the rank deliberately, the rank she hadn't been called in 3 years, and the word landed without fanfare and without sentimentality and with a precision that was its own kind of acknowledgement. He left. She stood in the medication room for a moment, and then she went back to work. The mentorship program was Sousa's idea formally, and Cross's idea practically, and Maya's execution entirely. She built it over the following 6 weeks while simultaneously running the first full personnel standards review that Ravenport had undergone in a decade, and the two things informed each other in ways she hadn't anticipated. The review kept showing her the same patterns, the same structural assumptions, the same invisible hierarchies that sorted people by title and surface presentation rather than actual competence. And the program gave her a place to put what she was learning about how those patterns got broken. She called it something functional rather than inspirational. The Integrated Personnel Standards Initiative. Because she had no patience for names that required explanation, and she understood that things named after their function lasted longer than things named after their ambition. The first cohort was 12 people, 6 officers, 6 enlisted, selected specifically because they were not the obvious choices, not the people already marked for advancement by the existing system, but the ones whose records showed competence that the record-keeping apparatus had not caught up to yet. Reyes helped her design the curriculum. Reyes was back in San Diego, working through her own reintegration process, which was not simple and which she did not pretend was simple, and their phone calls were the kind of phone calls that don't follow an agenda because they don't need to. They were the calls of 2 people putting something back together that had been broken at a specific moment by specific choices made by specific people who were now, appropriately, facing those choices in rooms with lawyers and investigators and formal records. On the day of the program's first session, Maya stood in the conference room, not the East Wing suite, but the main training room on the 2nd floor of the hospital, a room with windows that looked out onto the parade ground and adequate chairs and a whiteboard that worked. And she looked at 12 people who had been chosen because the system had overlooked them, and she thought about what to say. She had prepared remarks. She had them in her jacket pocket, She didn't use them. "I'm going to tell you something that nobody told me when I was starting out," she said. "And I want you to hear it as information, not as inspiration, because I have limited patience for inspiration that doesn't connect to something true." 12 people looked at her. "The institution does not always see you clearly," she said. "That is not a motivation speech. That's an operational reality. The institution uses the tools it has to evaluate the people inside it, and the tools are imperfect, and the people running the tools are imperfect. And the result is that genuine competence is missed regularly. Not maliciously, mostly. Just missed." She paused. "What that means in practice is that the gap between what you are and what the institution recognizes you as being is going to be your problem to manage. Not your fault, yours to manage." She let that sit. "The people who tried to make my record disappear didn't count on one thing," she said. "They counted on me staying invisible. They counted on the fact that the nurse with the coffee tray is easy to walk past. They were right that people would walk past me. They were wrong about what that cost." She looked at the room steadily. Invisible doesn't mean powerless. It means you have to be precise. You have to be so exactly right at what you do that when visibility finally comes, and it comes, one way or another, it always comes, there's nothing to dispute. She thought about Kerwin Dale's mother sitting in the chair at 0600 with her face slack with relief. She thought about Marcia's wife Loretta and the word okay, said by a woman who needed honest information more than comfort. She thought about Felicity Orem handing her a chart with a slightly different quality of directness. The particular language of respect passed through the act of a document. "You're in this program because someone looked at your record and saw the gap," she said, "between what you are and what's been recognized. We're going to work on closing that gap. Some of it is skill, some of it is visibility. How to be visible without performing visibility, which is different. Some of it is just knowing what you're worth, which sounds simple and is the hardest part of all of it." She paused. "Questions?" A hand went up immediately. A young Navy petty officer second class named Yara Osei, 25, whose file showed 4 years of consistent above-average performance and 0 formal commendations, which was exactly the kind of record that had put her in this room. "How long did it take?" Osei asked. "Before people saw you correctly?" Maya looked at her for a moment. "Some of them haven't," she said. "And that's part of the answer. You're not going to reach everyone. You're not going to fix every room or every institution or every person who walks past you without looking. What you're working toward is something smaller and more durable than universal recognition. You're working toward being so clearly, specifically, undeniably yourself that the people who matter in the moments that matter cannot look away." Osei nodded slowly. "The nurse with the coffee tray," Maya said. "That was me for 14 months, and it was also who I was before that, and before that for 20 years. The tray doesn't change the hands that are carrying it. The room doesn't change the person walking in." She looked at the 12 faces in front of her. "You were something before anyone here recognized it. You'll be that something long after this program is over. The program is just documentation, a formal record of what was already true." She picked up the whiteboard marker and turned to the board. "Let's start," she said. She ate lunch alone on the roof access stairwell landing, which was not a lunch spot that appeared in any Ravenport orientation material, but which had the dual advantage of a clear view of the flight line and nobody else using it. She ate a sandwich and drank the good coffee she'd started buying at the place off base that Cross had pointed her toward. And she watched the helicopters on the flight line and the fixed-wing aircraft in the distance and the ordinary vast blue of a North Carolina afternoon. She had not flown in 3 years and 2 months. She was not ready to fly again. She acknowledged this without judgment, the way she acknowledged most things about herself, accurately, without either indulgence or dismissal. The timeline was not fixed. It would be what it would be. What she knew was this: the woman who had come to Ravenport 14 months ago to be invisible had not been trying to disappear. She had been trying to recover. Those were different things, and she had confused them for a while, which was a human error, and she had made it, and she had also eventually found her way to the distinction. You cannot recover by disappearing. Recovery requires presence, showing up, doing the work, letting the work be seen. The tray and the table are the same work. The nurse and the commander are the same person. The invisible life she'd built had been a waiting room, not a destination, and the moment Brooks had said, "You don't belong here," something in her had said back quietly, "Finally." I do. Not for him. Not for Cross or Souza or the institution. For the 11 men in the Danvar Valley. For Reyes on the ground in the dark. For Kerwin Dale's cracked ribs and Marsh's wife, and the young petty officer Osei, who had 4 years of consistent performance and 0 commendations, and who had raised her hand in a training room and asked a real question and deserved a real answer. For herself, which was the hardest part to say and the most necessary. The flight line shimmered in the afternoon heat, and the helicopters sat patient on the tarmac, and somewhere above the thin cloud layer, the sky was the same sky it had always been. The same sky she'd navigated by instruments through weather and darkness, and the particular controlled terror of a carrier approach at night. She finished her coffee. She went back to work. The hallway was busy with the ordinary noise of a military hospital in the middle of a Wednesday. Voices, equipment, the soft, rhythmic beep of monitors through open doors, the specific density of a place doing what it was built to do. She walked through it, and a passing corpsman nodded, and a doctor she'd worked a shift with held the stairwell door open, and at the nursing station, Felicity Oram looked up from a chart and said, without preamble, "Your 1400 is early, Bay 2. "On it," Maya said. She took the chart from Felicity's hands and she read it. Walking, and she pushed through the bay door, and she was present, completely, without remainder. The same woman she had always been, finally in a room that could see her, doing the work that had always mattered, carrying nothing extra and leaving nothing behind. That is the truth about quiet strength. It does not wait to be named before it acts. It does not require an audience to remain itself. It does the work in the corridors and the supply rooms and the operating theaters and the training rooms and on the stairwell landing at lunch. And it keeps doing the work whether or not anyone is watching, because the work is not performed for watchers. It is performed because it is necessary, because someone has to, because the person who knows how is the person who shows up. The tray does not define the hands. The room does not define the person walking in. The uniform does not contain the history. And the woman everyone thought was just a nurse became, in the end, exactly what she had always been. Irreducible, present, and precisely, fully herself.